Today we don't need to invest in creating tanks or purchasing tanks to tackle Pakistan. Tanks are going to play no role in the future with respect to Pakistan. This topic also is that armed forces, that is the Army, Navy and Air Force, while they stand to have exclusive responsibilities, that the objective of the Army is to protect the land frontiers, objective of the Navy is to basically protect the territorial frontiers, and objective of the Air Force is to ensure that it provides support to the armed forces at the Army Navy level and also secure the airspace of India. So now what has happened is that two things we have to keep in mind. Firstly, that armed forces, each of these three, Army, Navy, Air Force, have their own intelligence units which are there that we need to remember. Intelligence unit of the Army is called MI, which stands for Military Intelligence. Army, which has its own military intelligence, in the same way Navy has the same, that is Naval Intelligence. And same way the Air Force has its own intelligence unit called the AI, that is Air Intelligence. So one important thing here is that all the three armed forces, they have their own intelligence units. Now in the previous lecture, if you remember, I talked about an important aspect that India is not only facing a two-front war or a possibility of a 2.5 front war, but we also witness threats of the hybrid war, and we are in the state of hybrid war by our adversaries today. So what has happened over a period of time is that even the armed forces have realized this, and they have understood that considering that the geopolitical changes in our neighborhood are such that we are witnessing 2.5 front war today, and also the changes in our geopolitical neighborhood are such that some of our adversaries are responsible for hybrid war. So what has happened in this regard is that the armed forces today have tried to undertake some reforms. So some of the reforms that the armed forces have tried to undertake is, an important reform where they are working today is called theaterization. Now, what is theaterization? So what does the armed forces today try to do is that they have understood the different theaters from where adversaries might target us. For example, one theater is the Western theater, which is the Pakistan theater specifically. One theater is the maritime theater. One theater is our Chinese theater, which is also known as the Eastern theater. So what the armed forces have done is that they have undertaken detailed studies to identify different theaters from where India's adversaries can threaten us, in order to now ensure that there is a synchronized reform and synchronized response after the reform. The armed forces have started striving to go for theaterization. So what they are trying to do is that now the government of India in 2019 created the post of the Chief of Defence Staff. This was the first step towards theaterization. Creating this post of Chief of Defence Staff ensured one very important thing, and it ensured one thing, that over a period of time, this concerned person who occupies the post of CDS will now try to work with the three service chiefs. And not only the CDS occupant will work with the three service chiefs, but what he will try to do is that after working very closely with the three service chiefs, the CDS will establish a blueprint on distributing assets with respect to each theater. So this is an important thing to understand. That what the CDS will try to do is that he will sit with the Army Chief, Navy Chief, Air Force Chief. He will speak with them with respect to the threats that we witness in each theater, and then try to evolve a mechanism where Army, Navy and Air Force part away a few of their assets based upon the need of the theater to help the forces tackle that theater. So you see, till now we had basically different commands. So we had a Western Command, we had an Eastern Command, we had a Naval Command, we had a Tri-Services Command in Andaman Nicobar, etc. So now the objective is that, the world itself is gradually undertaking this evolution. The evolution is that rather than having a command-based approach, where one specific agency is given the responsibility to tackle that, there is a gradual need felt to have an integrated approach. So theaterization is an attempt to integration. So for example, let me put it more simply to you. So we had something earlier called the Western Command. Western Command, from the name, is very clear that it will tackle the threats on the western frontier of India. The biggest threat on the western frontier of India is Pakistan today. For a very long period of time, the Western Command was dominated by the army. Because earlier the threat from the Pakistani side from the land level was very direct. But you see, over a period of time, we have understood one thing. We have understood that when it comes to Pakistan, as they are not going to fight a direct war with us anymore, and the threat of a direct war is almost stands to be mitigated now, we know that Pakistan is trying to use tanzeems, and they are trying to use these tanzeems with the larger objective of destabilizing us. So in this particular context of they using tanzeems like Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, etc. to target us, we have understood one thing, that we need to target only these tanzeem and their elements whenever they are doing adventurism against us. So now what the government is trying to do and what the armed forces are trying to achieve is that they have now decided to create a Western theater. And under this Western theater now, they plan to bring Air Force more importantly here, and subsequently Navy, followed by the Army. So you see, Army, which earlier dominated the Western Command, now stands to go a little below in the priority. In the previous lecture, I explained you about the use of surgical strike as a sub-conventional option to tackle these tanzeems. So when we say that surgical strikes have to be carried out, they are carried out jointly by assets at the air level and assets at the army level. But the most important component in a surgical strike will be the role of the Air Force. Because after all, if the enemy territory has to be breached and you have to cross over the border to go to the enemy territory, whether it is the Pakistan occupied Kashmir or it is actual Kashmir, it is the air asset that has to be used and not the army, because army cannot travel across the land and go there to carry out an operation. That will be very dangerous. So the need of the Air Force has been increased today. And as the need of the Air Force stands to be increased today, Air Force is now likely to be given a much bigger priority. So now what we do in theaterization is that we create Western Command and redesignate it as a Western theater. Now the reason of calling it a command vis-a-vis the reason of calling it a theater is also different. As I said that in a command it is one force that dominates, but in a theater it is a union of three forces. So now what is going to happen is that we are going to have more air power deployed towards the Western front rather than the army power. By considering the fact that the objective of Pakistan to wage a direct war against us stands to be nullified today. Today we don't need to invest in creating tanks or purchasing tanks to tackle Pakistan. Tanks are going to play no role in the future with respect to Pakistan. Today, if we buy a tank or if we buy tanks from outside, what role they will play in with respect to Pakistan? If a tank of India is going to be deployed at the Pakistan border, what damage can it do there? On the other side of the Pakistan, we have nothing else but the agrarian fields, kapas ke khet and गेहूं के खेत. That is largely the thing that on the Pakistan side we have. So what will our tanks destroy on the Pakistan side? Nothing. But we need precision operations to target these tanzeems, for which air power becomes critical along with the army power. And while these two are acting in union with each other, the naval assets on the Pakistan side can be activated as a deterrence to Pakistan to do further adventurism. So this is what the armed forces are trying to achieve with respect to theaterization. Number one. Number two, if we look at now the Eastern Command, let's say, from Eastern Command to the Eastern Theater, the biggest threat on the eastern side from our adversary to India is China. Now, we have to analyze very carefully that how China is a threat to us. You see, when it comes to the Ladakh sector, this is a flat land, this is a plateau. And being a flat land or a plateau, what is happening here? In the flatland or the plateau of Ladakh, one important thing is that we need swift maneuverability of the army, which has to be supplied by logistics from the Air Force. Navy has no role to play with respect to China here in the Ladakh sector, as you can see. So when we create an Eastern Command and transform that Eastern Command now into an Eastern Theater, the assets of Navy are completely negated, and we can use the Navy here in some other aspect, in some other theater. Here, Army will be given the dominance to be supported by the Air Force. In the Western theater, we saw that it is the Air Force that will be given dominance. Similarly, when it comes to the China and tackling China, not only at Ladakh but now at the Arunachal side, here again it will be the army that will be given dominance to be supported by the air power, and Navy has no relevance here.